Over 250 years ago, the father of economics, Adam Smith, wrote in his famous book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, about the causes of international trade. As you are aware, Adam Smith is credited with the absolute advantage theory of international trade. Since the great work of Adam Smith, many economists have been trying to find out the answers for many questions related to international trade. Some of the important questions are: why do countries trade with each other? What are the prices at which goods or services exchange with each other, and also what are the gains from trade? The unequal distribution of natural resources on the earth results in the countries having different conditions in terms of climatic conditions, mineral resources, human and capital resources, managerial skills and abilities, entrepreneurial skills, and many other variables which determine the capacities of nations to produce goods and services. All these differences in the production possibilities lead to situations where some of the countries can produce some more goods and more efficiently than other countries. No country can produce all goods in the most efficient way. That is, at least at the least cost combination of the cost of production. In terms of the importance, the terms of trade are also very important when we consider international trade in the determination of the relative gains of trade, gains from trade in terms of the exchange of goods across nations. That is, when there is an exchange of goods and services across nations in terms of import and export, it is also important to understand the role of terms of trade in determining the rate at which goods are exchanged across nations. It has been the most important consideration and the attention in the discussion in the international economic problems is concentrated on this aspect, at least for two reasons. A, the gains from trade depend upon terms of trade. B, the developing countries feel that their products have suffered on a kind of a secular deterioration or a decline in their terms of trade, as it is known that developing countries export primary products, and these primary products have been facing a secular decline in the terms of trade, and as a result of which there has been some pattern of trade taking place across the world which is quite unjust, and due to this there has been a transfer of incomes from the developing countries to the developed countries, who over the past decades and more than a century have been in a sense exploiting the developing countries, by which the developing countries, they continue to export primary products whose terms of trade is adverse, it is not favorable to the developing countries. And on the other hand, the developed countries are able to gain and have been increasing their terms of trade. The terms of trade have been going in favor of the developed countries, and that too at the expense of developing countries.
After studying this module, you shall be able to answer the question why nations engage in international trade, learn how to measure the gains from trade and the role of terms of trade, identify the different types of terms of trade in determining the gains, and get to know the importance of different terms of trade in international trade. You shall be able to learn how gains from trade is measured using different concepts of terms of trade, evaluate the gains from trade using different concepts of terms of trade, and analyze how differences in terms of trade results in favorable gains in trade. Adam Smith, in his book Wealth of Nations, explains the importance of trade in the following abstract. It is the maxim of every prudent master of a family never to attempt to make at home what it will cost him more to make than to buy. The tailor does not attempt to make his own shoes, but buys them from the shoemaker. The shoemaker does not attempt to make his own clothes, but employs a tailor. The farmer attempts to make neither the one or the other, but employs those different artificers. What is prudence in the conduct of every private family can scarce be folly in that of a great kingdom. If a foreign country can supply us with a commodity cheaper than what we can make it, it better buy it of them with some part of the produce of our own industry employed in a way that we have some advantage. The diagram depicts the determination of terms of trade under general equilibrium with the help of offer curves. Commodity X is represented on x-axis and commodity Y is represented on y-axis. Nation 1 represents the offer curve of Nation 1, which specializes in the production of commodity X. Nation 2 represents the offer curve of Nation 2, which specializes in the production of commodity Y. When the terms of trade are evenly distributed between the trade partners, the equilibrium is established at point E, where the relative price of commodity X is equal to that of commodity Y. E, the equilibrium point, determining terms of trade where the two offer curves intersect. At point E, 60 units of commodity X are exchanged for 60 units of commodity Y. Moving on to various terms of trade, we have 5 categories. The gross barter terms of trade, net barter terms of trade, income terms of trade, single factorial terms of trade, and double factorial terms of trade. The gross barter terms of trade is the ratio of import quantity index to export quantity index. An increase in gross barter terms of trade indicates an improvement in the trade condition of a nation. The concept of gross barter terms of trade is used in the theory of reciprocal demand and in neoclassical theory to measure gains from international trade. Net terms of trade is the most commonly used expression for the terms of trade changes in the contemporary world. The gross barter terms concept uses quantity index for imports and exports, whereas the net barter or commodity terms concept makes use of the price index for imports and exports. The distinction between gross and net barter terms of trade was introduced by F. W. Tossing in 1927. Since it is very important for any country to take into account changes in its volume of exports resulting from export price changes, it is useful to correct the movements in commodity terms for changes in export volume. This is done by the concept of income terms of trade, which was first formulated by G. S. Dorrance in 1948-49. A rise in income terms of trade indicates that the country can obtain a larger volume of imports from the sale of its exports. Its capacity of import based on exports has increased. A change in the income terms of trade index cannot be interpreted as a measure of the gain from trade or as an indicator of welfare. It should be used simply as a measure of the quantity of imports bought by exports. The single factorial terms of trade is the ratio of the export price index and the import price index adjusted for changes in the productivity of the factors used in export production. While income terms of trade correct the commodity terms of trade for changes in the export volume, there is another attempt to correct commodity terms for changes in the productivity in producing export goods. The single factorial terms of trade is an attempt in that direction. It was Jacob Weiner who developed the concepts of single and double factorial terms of trade in 1937. Next is the significance of single factorial terms of trade as a terms of trade concept. It does not have much to do with the question of global inequalities. Constant single factorial terms indicate an effort by the country to achieve productivity increases within itself, but losing out that productivity gain to the foreign countries. It thereby helps to increase the standards of living in the foreign countries, but not within itself. When the commodity terms of trade are corrected for changes in productivity in producing both exports and imports, it is termed as double factorial terms of trade. The gross barter terms of trade is the ratio of import quantity index to export quantity index. An increase in gross barter terms of trade indicates an improvement in the trade condition of a nation. The concept of gross barter terms of trade is used in the theory of reciprocal demand and in neoclassical theory to measure gains from international trade. Symbolically, gross barter terms of trade is expressed as follows. G is equal to IQ upon XQ into 100, where IQ stands for the import quantity index, XQ for export quantity index, and G for gross barter terms. We multiply the whole expression IQ upon XQ by 100 to get rid of the decimal. The quantity index of imports and exports for the base year, let us say 2010, will always be equal to 100. The base year will serve as the benchmark period with which we can measure changes in the gross barter terms of trade in any given subsequent year, say 2011, 2012, 2013, and so on, 2020. Let us consider a hypothetical case as shown. The gross barter terms of trade for the base year 2010 will be 100 divided by 100 multiplied by 100, which is equal to 100 only. The gross barter terms of trade for the year 2011 will be 120 divided by 100 multiplied by 100, where 120 is the export quantity in the year 2011. This means that in 2011 we export the same quantity as in 2010, but we import more in 2011 than in 2010. In other words, the purchasing power of exports has gone up in 2011 as compared to the base year 2010. Similar calculations are done for the years 2012 and 2013. In 2012, as compared with the base year 2010, there has been no change in gross barter terms because both the import and export quantity index numbers have gone up from 100 to 120 between these periods. In brief, an increase in the import quantity index tends to improve gross barter terms, while an increase in the export quantity index would tend to worsen the gross barter terms of trade. Net barter terms of trade is the most commonly used expression for the terms of trade changes in the contemporary world. The gross barter terms concept uses quantity index for imports and exports, whereas the net barter or commodity terms concept makes use of the price index for imports and exports. The distinction between gross and net barter terms of trade was introduced by F. W. Tossing in 1927. Symbolically, net barter terms of trade is expressed as follows. N is equal to XP upon IP into 100, where IP stands for the price index number of import, XP for price index number of export, and N for net barter terms. We multiply the whole expression XP upon IP by 100 to get rid of the decimal. Let us understand the concept of net barter terms of trade using an example. Here again we have taken 2010 as the base year. The price index of imports and exports for the base year, say 2010, will always be equal to 100. The base year will serve as the benchmark period with which we can measure changes in the net barter terms of trade in any given subsequent year, say 2011, 2012, 2013, 2020, etc. The net terms of trade for the base year 2010 is 100 divided by 100 multiplied by 100, which equals 100. For the year 2011, the net terms of trade will be 120 divided by 100 multiplied by 100, which equals 120. And similarly, we calculate for the years 2012 and 2013. There is a general belief that improvement in commodity terms of trade would mean an improvement in the economic welfare of the country, because when the export prices go up, we sell our goods at a higher price, and when the import prices go down, we will be able to buy foreign goods at a lower price. In either case, commodity terms improve and the country is better off in terms of economic welfare. In brief, the commodity terms of trade are the most commonly used measure of terms of trade changes in a country, although it is not so easy to derive immediate welfare implications from commodity terms of trade changes. Since it is very important for any country to take into account changes in its volume of exports resulting from export price changes, it is useful to correct the movements in commodity terms for changes in export volume. This is done by the concept of income terms of trade. Symbolically, income terms of trade is expressed as I is equal to NXQ, where N refers to net barter or commodity terms of trade index, that is XP upon IP. XQ stands for the export quantity index and I stands for income terms of trade. Let us again understand this with the help of an example. Here again, we have taken 2010 as the base year. For the base year 2010, we assign a value of 100 for all the three variables, that is, export price index, import price index, and the export quantity index. The income terms of trade for the year 2010 is 100 divided by 100 multiplied by 100, which equals to 100. For the year 2011, we have income terms of trade as 90 divided by 100 multiplied by 120, which equals 108. And similarly for the year 2012. Hence, in the year 2011, there is a fall in the export price index with no change in the import price index, suggesting that the commodity terms have worsened. But there has been an increase in the export quantity index from 100 to 120 in 2011. A 10% decrease in the export price index is matched by a 20% increase in the export quantity, so that in the end we notice that there has been an 8% improvement in the income terms of trade in 2011 as compared with the base year 2010. While income terms of trade correct the commodity terms of trade for changes in the export volume, there is another attempt to correct commodity terms for changes in the productivity in producing export goods. The single factorial terms of trade is an attempt in that direction. Symbolically, single factorial terms of trade is expressed as S is equal to NXP, where N refers to commodity terms, XP stands for Export Productivity Index, and S refers to single factorial terms of trade. Understanding the concept with the help of the same example, we take 2010 as the base year. For the base year 2010, we assign a value of 100 for all the three variables, that is, export price index, import price index, and the export productivity index. The single factorial terms of trade for the year 2010 will be 100 divided by 100 multiplied by 100, which equals 100. For the year 2011, it is 90 divided by 100 multiplied by 100, which equals 90. And similarly, it is calculated for the year 2012. In 2011, there has been a drop in export price index by 10%, which is not offset by rise in export productivity index, so that single factorial terms have deteriorated by 10 percentage points. Here, we are concerned not so much with the question of global inequalities, but the significance of single factorial terms trade as a terms of trade concept. Constant single factorial terms indicate an effort by the country to achieve productivity increases within, but losing out that productivity gain to the foreign countries and thereby helping to increase the standards of living in the foreign countries, but not within itself. When the commodity terms of trade N are corrected for changes in productivity in producing exports and imports, the result is the double factorial terms of trade. Symbolically, double factorial terms of trade can be expressed as D is equal to N into XP by MP, where N refers to commodity terms, XP and MP stands for the Export Productivity Index and Import Productivity Index, and D refers to double factorial terms of trade. The double factorial terms of trade will diverge from single factorial terms when there is a change in the factor cost of producing imports. This has no significance to the importing country because it only means that there has been an increase or a decrease in productivity in the country from which it is importing goods.
Now we shall recapitulate and summarize what we have studied in this module. In this module, we've discussed various concepts, definitions, and certain theories related to trade. The most important being the terms of trade. Terms of trade are crucial in determining the gains from trade which a country achieves through international trade. The terms of trade is used as an indicator of the measurement of welfare gains. There is the concept of gross barter terms of trade and income terms of trade, which are useful as they indicate the changes in the import capacity or the purchasing power of exports. Furthermore, it is the commodity terms of trade which is useful in measuring the gains from trade. While it is true that the commodity terms of trade are most commonly used and also the most useful concept of terms of trade, particularly in measuring gains from trade.